Hi, this is Jim Harries with Esri. Today I'm going to show you how to make a map like this. What is this map? Well, it's a map of senior population all around the United States. In this case, we're looking at Phoenix, Arizona. We're looking at 2010 census tract data with an indication visually of where the concentrations of seniors are and what the count of seniors are. So up here in Sun City and Surprise, Arizona, we have not only a lot of seniors as indicated by these large circles. This census tract has almost 8,000 seniors alone just in that one census tract, and there's only 8,775 people total. So there's a majority, vast majority of seniors living there, and the concentration is indicated by the bright blue color, whereas some of these downtown census tracts have a very low count of seniors, 300 out of 5,000 people. That's not a very high concentration at all. So how do we get to a map like this, and why is it useful? Well, it's useful certainly because with one glance, once you know what the visual pattern is, that bright indicates concentration and size indicates quantity, you immediately get a sense of what Phoenix looks like versus, say, Chicago. So if we run up to Chicago real quick, what kind of patterns emerge there that we may or may not know about. You might expect some people along the Gold Coast of Chicago to kind of skew towards the senior population, but you may not have predicted this exact pattern of where seniors are located throughout Chicago. So how do we make a map like this? Why is it useful? Let's get to that. Now, throughout this process today, we're going to be following kind of an iterative flow where we find some data, we're going to edit our map, configure our pop-up, and share the map via an application. And throughout, we're reviewing and improving our work as we go. That iterative process is how you take raw data and turn that into a very useful map. So let's get started. I'm going to go to this. I'm already logged into ArcGIS Online. I'm going to search for a layer. I'm going to search for this phrase, senior population census 2010, through all of ArcGIS Online. And I find a layer that I published earlier. You can find it as well. It's got a thumbnail to kind of visually remind me, yeah, this is the one. And if I'm not sure, I can click the item details and go look at the full detailed card for this page. For this particular map layer. So yeah, I'm interested in this, and I just hit add to map, hit done, and I see it's added to my table of contents. Although it's grayed out, which is sort of this software's way of saying, hey, you got to zoom in if you want to see this. So one way to zoom in is just type in, let's go to Phoenix since that's where we started, and there we are. So we're in Phoenix. I've got a familiar blue dot layer, and I want to show how did we end up with a map like that. So to do that, I'm going to make several copies of this layer. If that's all right. I'll make 3. And the first one, we'll rename that, we'll call it, I had to think about how to spell this. Polygon choropleth, which is why nobody says those things. And then this one, I'm going to rename this one simple size. And then the last one, we'll rename that one, and that'll be our final copy, proportional size with transparency. So you can kind of see where I'm going. I love to name the layers first and then try to build them to what I have envisioned in my mind's eye, because that kind of works nicely. So to get started, let's set all these back to sort of an initial condition. Should have done this when I copied them, but oh well, we're here now. And all I'm trying to do is, as I'll show you here, I'm just trying to get it back to sort of, a pretty typical GIS looking map. When you first add a layer, it's like, hey, here's your data, what do you want to do? So I'm okay with that. Let's go with, remember, we're going to end up here. So to start with, I want to just jump over here and show the advantages, disadvantages of different styles of maps. So here's a Polygon choropleth map. You see the polygons on your screen. and I'm going to just touch the attribute I'm interested in. So I'm interested in the count of seniors age 65 and older. And you're going to see something right away that the software says, hey, I noticed this attribute is an integer. And usually an integer is a count or a total. It's one of the common ways that databases tend to track counts and totals. So the software took an educated guess. In my case, though, I'm determined. I want to make a Polygon choropleth map showing the intensity of seniors. The problem is that when you fill up a polygon full of color based on a count, it sort of distorts things because this census tract is much different size than this tiny little one right next door. So it's not really fair that they're unequal size objects to begin with. If you're going to map a polygon choropleth map, you've got to have some normalized information, such as a rate or a percentage is probably best. So if we took the attribute percent of the population that's 65 or older, well, now this map's going to become much more meaningful. If you notice carefully, the map almost inverted in terms of its color. And we see up in the northwest corner a high concentration of seniors. 66% of the people there are seniors. I click on this census tract, 50%, whereas the yellow ones are 4% and so on. And if I wanted to work with colors a little bit, what I would suggest doing right now, this map is pretty much a solid block of color. The labels are underneath the color. I can't really see anything. Let me turn that off for you. I would recommend changing the base map. We've got a couple of base maps that you might try for statistical maps like these. The one I'd recommend you start with is the light gray canvas because it's the simplest one. It puts the labels on top, and the light gray canvas base map is pretty neutral overall in terms of its color. We're covering it completely with these census tracts, so the main thing is I just want these things on top. There's another base map out there you might want to try that's equally interesting. This one takes a little bit of a search at the moment. We haven't added this to the Living Atlas yet, but if you type human geography base map and you search all of ArcGIS Online, you can add this character, use as base map, and then drop the detail in, and then drop the labels in, hit done, and then you can just move this guy to the base map, move this labels to the base map, and then set them both as a reference layer. And you're in good shape here where you've got roads on top of your choropleth map and you've got labels on top of your choropleth map. So that makes things pretty nice. I'm probably going to stick with that. Hey, it lost my work. Well, that was my fault. I guess we'll see how easy it is to recreate this. I touched the attribute, percent population 65 or older. There's my familiar colors, and now I've got the reference of the interstates and the city labels to help kind of guide my map. This is nice. By default, Smart Mapping here is using a continuous color ramp where these breakpoints are chosen based on significant figures they found in the data. So this histogram of the data, if I zoom in on it, you'll get even a better picture of all the values around the mean. The breakpoints are being chosen based on one standard deviation above and below this mean. The mean value of the data set is 13.7%, meaning 13.7% of the population is age 65 or over. One standard deviation above is 20.7 and below is 7. So the reason we chose those values by default is to give you, the map maker, somewhere to start and say, okay, so that's what my data is telling me, that the dark blue areas have a higher concentration and the yellow have a significantly lower concentration. Now what I always do is do a search on the web, or I go find a subject matter expert and I ask them questions. And in this case I did a quick search of the topic senior population 65 plus census 2010, and I'll just skip ahead to what I found on page, gosh, was it 15? I think it was. It was Yeah, there we go. Sorry for the delay there. Okay, so in 2010, there were 40 million Americans aged 65 and older, and the percentage in 2010 was 13%, projected to reach 21%, 20.9% in the year 2050. So 13.0 is the national average officially when they total up all the people. So if I were to switch this map theme to an above and below pattern, now I've got 3 handles, and I can move this up or down as I need. I'll just drag it to 13, or I could type in 13 if I want. And the upper handle, I think 21 was of interest, 20.9, and we could probably take this to 5 if we wanted to be kind of consistent. There's an 8-point gap between here and here. There's an 8-point gap between here and here. And now the map is kind of showing. Let's kind of do it this way. In green are all the areas with a significant number of seniors, and in darker gray are all the areas with very few. It's kind of up to you to decide what's the best pattern. Maybe you need an above and below kind of pattern like this. Maybe you want the I'm trying to say the census tracts with far fewer seniors. Maybe you want to show them in a particular color so that they stand out as strongly as the areas with high concentration stand out. So let's just kind of hit done on this, and that's one way to kind of work. Oh, one other point, and it's a good one to make. What's the difference between making a map like this, where we're using a continuous color ramp? Well, the advantage is you can kind of see visually, this census tract has more seniors than this dark purple, right, which is further down on the scale. So you can get kind of a sense of, relative to their neighbors, which census tract is lower in terms of the quantity of seniors on a percentage basis than others. Another way to go, a lot of folks do it kind of like this. This is kind of your traditional GIS classified map, right, where you use classifications, you let the software make some choice using natural breaks, quantile, standard deviation, equal interval, or manually entered breaks. And what this map is really saying is there is no significant difference between a value of 19.8 and 48. Even though 48 is twice, almost 3 times larger, there's no difference between them. We're going to color them all the same because they, in the context of the map we're making, they don't mean anything different. Whether it's true or not, these breakpoints have a lot of power. So for example, if I set this to, I think we set it to 5, and we set the other one, I think the national average was 13, and this is 21. This is a smart map. It incorporates the knowledge I gained by reading this article, and I put it into this map. The 13 is the national average, 21 is where we'll be in 2050, and this is the same difference. It's 8 percentage points lower than 13, just like this value is 8 percentage points higher. So this kind of makes sense. It's a smart map, what I would term a smart map. The difference between this and unclassified is that you're letting the data breathe a little bit. You're letting the map kind of spread the color out so that it's a little more intuitive. What is the relationship in and among these tracks in the cases where we're just trying to understand the data and the variation of it? A lot of times the way I'll explain it to people is a good reason to classify data is if you have a specific policy that creates the need for people not to see all the detail. You have a policy that says, look, we're only going to fund senior centers in census tracts which have 21% or higher. That might be a case where you say, okay, well that's important to know, so why don't we just kind of drop this down to a couple, maybe 3 classes, and if we're only going to fund senior centers in cases where there's 21% or higher, it really doesn't matter what these other classes are. Only the dark blue areas are candidates for senior centers. And that to me is one difference between sort of a policy-driven map where you're trying to be very explicit about who will get what versus trying to understand the data and how it varies across space. Hopefully that all kind of makes sense. So why don't I just leave this at 21, and we'll leave this at 5. That seemed to be our interesting points. Hit OK. And that's our Polygon choropleth map showing the percent of the population that are seniors. 85% in this one census tract. That's amazing. Okay, now how might we do that as just a straight up count? I was interested in the count of seniors. And as we saw before, if I just touch this attribute, the software says, oh, it looks like that's an integer. I'm going to take a chance that this is a count. And it's going to suggest some breakpoints for this map based on the min and max values it finds in the histogram. So it scans all 60,000 records, and it says, okay, well, we got a 16-point minimum size circle and an 80-point maximum. So right now the software is saying the only guy who can get, the only census tract in the country that can get the maximum 80-point size is this one census tract that has 19,323 seniors in it. So this is what we call outlier-driven cartography. The outliers are in charge of everything that's happening here. Maybe that's desirable. There are cases where it is, but in our case, what we usually recommend is take the average census tract. The so-called average census tract has 619 seniors in it. So, okay, let's go with that for a minute. And there's a very slight change to the map, but when you change this max value, watch how dramatically things can change, right? And the reason for that is as we move these two slider bars closer and closer together, the value difference between 4,500 and 619, all the numbers in between those two min and max values, they are spread out among the range of point sizes from 16 to 80 points, right? So there's only so much expressiveness you can get out of an 80-point symbol or a 16-point symbol or everything in between. So what we try to do is try to figure out, well, what's a reasonable story here? I mean, 619, there's nothing magical about that. I tell you what, just to be relaxed about this, I'm going to set it to 500, and I'm going to set this to be 10 times that minimum at 5,000. And now I've got sort of a tenfold increase spread across this, and as before, I have a classify option. If I turn that on, it's like a time machine. I'd step back 5 years, and I can make those same maps we've always made in GIS using classification. So what this map is now saying is there is no difference between a census tract that has 3,601 people and 19,000 people. I think that makes sense because 3,601 might be kind of an outlier. But significantly, what it means is whether you have 1,350 people or twice that number, more than twice that number, 3,600 people, that's all the same. Doesn't matter. It's all the same. So there are cases where, again, you want to classify things that way, but I'm definitely of the opinion that letting the data breathe a little bit allows the opportunity for your users, the people who view your maps, to see patterns in the data that are otherwise hidden by these somewhat arbitrary classifications. So let's go with 5,000 and 500 again. And now we have just a pretty simple map, right, where the size is based on the count of seniors found in each census tract, right? And that's a good map. I can work with that. Lastly, we want to go with size and transparency. So how does that happen? Well, the easiest way that happens is for me to get rid of that layer, take the layer that was working quite nicely, and let's copy it, turn off the original, and I'll go ahead and call my shot here. This is going to be proportional with transparency. Yeah. There you go. So I've called my shot. I'm going to make this a proportionally sized thing, but I'm also incorporate something called transparency. It's going to scan those 60,000 records, give me a histogram, and I can start to work with this. So right down here, right now transparency is set at about 20%, and I can make that layer more and more transparent as I drag it to the right. I can bring it all the way back to the left to make it solid fill. I can set the transparency based on attribute. So guess what attribute I'm going to use? I'm going to use a rate. Always use a rate for transparency. Well, I don't want to say always, but most of the time you're going to use transparency. You're going to use a rate with transparency. And the reason why is it usually gives you a nice normalized bell curve you can work with. Let's see what it comes up with. So yeah, again, there's our 13% average across the country for census tracts. I'm going to drop, so at 21%, I'm going to make that symbol opaque, 0% transparent, totally solid. And I think we were talking about 5%. What if we set it at the national average of 13%? So at 13%, we're going to start cheating towards about 80% transparent. And now look what has happened to the map. Certain things have receded into the map. All of the downtown areas have receded back into the map. It's not that we're saying there are no seniors there. We're making an editorial choice to emphasize certain things. We are emphasizing tracts with large quantities of seniors, even this one, which is a low percentage, and this one, which is both large quantity and large percentage. And it's totally up to you what editorial stance you want to take. Maybe 80% is a little bit harsh. Maybe we'll knock it back to like 75 or 70%. Let's wait for it here. Knock it to 75. Okay. So we've got that. And then lastly, I just want to change the color. We've got a lot of colors and shapes available. You can even put in a hex value of a color if your organization or your customer prefers a certain color. You know, we'll often go to a customer's website and just look at what colors have already been approved by their marketing group and kind of borrow liberally from there. But for my case, I'm just going to take this dark blue pattern for the outline. I'm going to take the next blue up from my dark blue pattern, and I'm going to drop about a 50–60% transparency on that thing. And now I can see these discs, and that's a little bit light, so maybe I'm going to knock that back to 50. Okay, so now I can see what I want to see, where I want to see it. And I've got my map ready. It's time for me to save. Probably should have been saving all along, but worked out just fine. So let's call this seniors in the USA. And for some tags, these are things to help other people find this map. We want population, since that word is not in the title. We want census, since that's our source. What year? 2010. Maybe another word for senior. Maybe age. And then a description. I always encourage people, just write a sentence and start it with this map or whatever helps you get started writing a sentence. This map shows the concentration and count of seniors in the U.S. according to the 2010 census. And I'm going to select all that because I'm going to use it again in a minute. Save the map. Got yourself a map. Well, if you're ready, you can share it with people in a group. You can share it with your people in your organizational account, or you can share it with the public. So I am going to choose the public. And I'm going to choose create a web app. We've got a ton of different web apps you can choose from. The one I want, I happen to know, is called Minimalist. And if I touch it, I can preview what it looks like, or I can just go ahead and create it. So I'm going to create it. It's going to be called Seniors in the USA App. I'm going to enter a summary right there and hit done. So what it's going to do, it's going to spin up this application in the cloud. Don't have to hire a programmer, don't have to hire a CSS expert. You just have to be able to configure an existing app with the particular settings that you want. So let's go do that. I've already chosen my web map. I want to keep it on the light frame. I think I'll keep that there. If I wanted to, I could choose some custom colors for different things. I could enter a custom CSS if I really want to do some custom CSS work. You have the option in this particular application's case. I want to put the navigation in the top right button. I don't want a base map. I don't want a scale bar. In my case, I want the side panel to load when the app loads, and put the map details and the pop-up content in the side panel. And then lastly, I'd like to let people search for their own city and put it in there. I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to hit launch. Let's take a look at what it looks like. Got a nice clean look, nice clean app. I've got navigation that works. My pop-ups work. In this case, the pop-ups appear over here. And I can search for another city. Right away I can see a pattern in Chicago I didn't know really existed. There's some Gold Coast stuff, some high concentrations of seniors in the Gold Coast. The interior, it looks to be like a normal or below normal average number of seniors living. And then there's some interesting concentrations kind of reaching out like spider legs out from the city. It's kind of interesting. So are we done? Well, I didn't really show you how to build a pop-up, so I think we're going to go back and look at that. Also, I notice under details, I don't have a description here of what this map shows. I'm choosing not to show the legend, so I want this map to stand on its own. I want people to just read some words and understand what this thing is. So to do that, I'm going to hit close on the configure. It should take me back to the item page. Yep, and there's no description. So if I paste a description in here and just write a sentence, bright blue areas indicate high concentrations of seniors in that neighborhood. How do I spell neighborhood? And actually, let's make that the first sentence. The size of this symbol indicates the number of seniors, regardless of concentration. And that's an important concept. The fact that you can have a lot of something and it's just not a very highly concentrated something. That's an important thing that a map, I would say only a map can deliver. So now if I just refresh this page, we'll see, did it pull my description in? He says, trusting. I updated the wrong thing. Oh, see, it's good to make an error sometimes. I updated the app, and what it wants me to update is the web maps description. So what should I do? I think what I should do is copy that, go to my content, and go find the web map I created. And it's right here, Seniors in the USA web map. I just touch it, go to the description, paste, and save. And normally I would spend more than 10 seconds documenting my work, as you would as well. So that's where you would do it. And at that point, it shows up here. Bright blue areas indicate high concentrations of seniors in that neighborhood. And you can do little nice touches like you can say, take that text, and that's background color. We want foreground, so you can pick a nice bright blue. See how that looks. Looks all right. Maybe bold it. Hit save. And refresh. Kind of nice to see how this all kind of works together in a simple way. Here's a nice map. Doesn't even need a legend. Bright blue areas indicate high concentrations. Okay, we're good. Now how would I get the pop-ups working? That's what you're thinking. Real easily. Most pop-ups start out life in a very humble fashion. They start out looking like, let's see if I remove this existing pop-up. and then enable it. This is what most pop-ups look like at first. Just what we call our rows and columns, just columns of data. If you're lucky, you've got aliases to explain what these things are. And often what I'll do is I'll show this pop-up to a subject matter expert, or I'll just look at it myself and figure, what is interesting in here? What's the story? When someone clicks on this, given that my subject is seniors in the United States and my map is showing both concentration and account, what do I want this pop-up to actually say? And how do I get it done? Well, you go to configure pop-up on the layer. You got to think about what do you want it to say. Maybe at the top we want it to say something like the state abbreviation, the word tract, and then the name of the census tract. So it's state tract. And next we'll move on, change it from a list of field attributes, the rows and columns, and change it to say a custom attribute display. And this is where I recommend, again, you just write a sentence. The population here of seniors age 65 plus is, and give them the number. Go in and pick a field that contains that count. I believe it's this one, 2010 population 65 years old, which is what percent? Percent of the total population. Nice, clean, easy. If I want, I can add a column chart, a bar chart kind of thing. Column chart is a vertical bar chart where we kind of track, let's compare the 65 and up crowd against the 18 and up crowd and the total pop. Okay, we hit that and we get total pop, we get 18 and under, and we get 65 and older. Right? I notice that there's 2 digits of precision on my pop-up, which is kind of, I don't know, snotty. So I'm going to get rid of that 2 digits of precision and be a little more human. Like, you know, I think it's reasonable to expect 1 digit of precision. The other thing is I don't like the order in which things are appearing in the pop-up. I want the count of 18-year-olds to come after the 65 and over. So I just reordered it right there. And now you got your total pop, your senior pop, and your youth pop. Right? That's how you make a pop-up. I'm going to hit save on that web map. And my app, if I refresh it, just inherits those changes. It's kind of nice. I don't have to rebuild everything just to make one change. Total, senior, and youth. So I think that's everything I wanted to show you here. We've been kind of going around this circle of editing your map and configuring and sharing and then reviewing and improving. I usually go around this circle a couple of times, you know, kind of widening the pool of people I share my maps with so that others can offer their input and observations. It's a very good way to go. And then I want to thank you all for watching this video. My contact information is shown there, email. I love questions about maps, especially if you send me a link to a working map, then we can have a conversation. And my Twitter is there in case you need another person to follow. So thanks for watching today again, and I appreciate your time.